I recently visited a Goodwill Outlet where all of the merchandise is stuff that no one wanted at the regular Goodwills. So these discarded items are literally days away from ending up in a landfill. I did find a few hidden gems, which I'll show you at the end of the video. However, today I'll be upcycling the sad and neglected things I purchased, like a broken statue, a rusty mailbox, a lid without a pot, to name just a few. Seriously, you are going to be amazed at how I transformed these cast-offs into unique and beautiful home decor. And I can't wait to show you. So let's get started.
I think someone must have taken the sewing supplies and left this Singer storage box behind for me to find. I printed out a pretty vintage label in a size that would fit inside the lid of the storage box. I used a good quality glue stick to adhere the image to a piece of cereal box cardboard. Then I applied hot glue along the inside rim of the lid to adhere the label. Using that label as inspiration for the contents of the box, I printed out some other seed packet labels. I also adhered these to some more of the cereal box cardboard to give them some thickness and stability. I added these seed packets and two small terracotta pots to the box, adding some greenery to one of the terracotta pots and a small fake bird to the other. I also wanted to add a small birdhouse, but first I needed to glue in a piece of styrofoam so that the birdhouse would sit up higher in the box. There was nothing wrong with this next little wicker basket, but it was pretty ordinary, so I could see why people had passed over it. I started by using some wire cutters to remove the handle. Then I began adding strips of black florist wire across the basket. I twisted one end of the strip of florist wire around the wire frame. Then I pulled the wire to the opposing side and twisted that end of the wire around the metal frame. I repeated this process 3 times, going across the center of each side of the basket and from corner to corner. Then I used another small strip of wire to twist around all of the loops to join them together at the top. Next, I hot glued a piece of styrofoam inside the basket, and then I took apart a greenery pot that I had recently purchased at IKEA so that I could add just the greenery to the styrofoam. I added a few additional pieces of wire to the top, which I twisted around a pencil as a decorative accent. I wanted to add a tag to hang from the basket, so I printed out another one of those vintage seed packet labels and Mod Podged it to a small piece of wood. Then I just drilled a hole in one of the corners of the piece of wood, ran some twine through it, and tied it to the basket. Candlesticks are another ho-hum item that people often pass over at the thrift store, especially when they're not sold as a pair. I popped out the metal candle cup and then drilled a small hole down the center of the candlestick. I added a little hot glue to the hole and then stuck in a faux vine-like stem. To dress up my plant, I printed out several butterfly images on cardstock paper. I used my Cricut machine to save the time of having to cut the butterflies out by hand. I made sure to print out 2 of every butterfly image so that I could glue them back to back to create a 2-sided butterfly. Once all the butterflies were assembled, I used a little hot glue down the center back to attach the butterflies to the faux stems. I used a little hot glue and Spanish moss to fill in the candle hole around the base of the stem. Now, let me show you something that was definitely headed for the landfill. This little fairy candle holder was missing one of its wings. I felt the easiest way to fix it was to remove the other wing. Now she's just a pretty girl with a bird in her hand. I used Loctite repair putty to fill in the holes. You just cut off a slice and then knead it in your hands until it turns one consistent color of gray. It's malleable like clay, but dries super hard in a very short amount of time. You can even sand it smooth when it's dry if you want. I decided to give the figurine a concrete look by painting it with Waverly's mineral chalk paint. Once the paint was dry, then I went over it with a coat of white wax, dabbing off the excess. There were 3 little shelves for votive candles, but I decided to make a little bird nest for the shelf closest to the bird. I glued in a small piece of sheet moss, and then I twisted a little bit of angel hair vine into a circle using some florist wire to hold its shape. I glued the vine on top of the sheet moss, and then I also glued in a little Spanish moss. To match the small size of the bird, I just used some tiny plastic berries for eggs inside the nest. This little tricycle would never have ended up at the Goodwill Outlet if its basket had not been broken. I decided to remove it. However, I used it in another project later in the video. I replaced it with a Dollar Tree box, which I painted with Dixie Belle's kudzu green. I drilled 4 small holes in the base of the box so that I could run wire through those holes and attach the box to the tricycle. I decided to line the box with a vintage handkerchief that I also picked up at the Goodwill Outlet. I pushed a piece of styrofoam in the box over the handkerchief, and then I began adding lavender stems and a little bit of Spanish moss. I created a lavender label in Canva, which I printed out in a small size to fit on one of those Dollar Tree plant markers. I just used glue stick to adhere it and then used a utility knife and some sandpaper to remove the excess paper around the edges. As a finishing touch, I hot glued just the top portion of a Dollar Tree transparent butterfly sticker to the handlebars.
I want to take just a minute to tell you about today's sponsor, Fetch. Fetch is one of my all-time favorite apps. It's 100% free and super easy to use, allowing you to earn rewards on literally anything you buy.
Just snap your receipts. The process only takes seconds, and you don't have to worry about where the receipt is from or what you purchased. You can also click the e-receipt function to get rewarded for online shopping. The app automatically snaps your email and finds the rewards for you. After you snap, you can redeem your points for hundreds of rewards, including Amazon, Visa, Starbucks, and Walmart gift cards.
Click on the link in the description box below and use the word cottage, or just scan the QR code on the screen, and you'll get an extra 5,000 reward points when you snap your first receipt.
And now I want to show you what I did with that broken basket that I took off the tricycle. First, I cut off the top of the basket so that it would be even all the way around. And then I hot glued on a pretty piece of lace on the outside edge. I hot glued a piece of styrofoam inside the basket and then added some faux flowers. I also hot glued on a small ceramic rabbit from my stash. And then I filled in around the rabbit and flowers with some bright green reindeer moss. Then I created a handle for the basket using a faux vine-like stem. I'm so glad I could save this little basket from the landfill. If you noticed that weird clock face that I purchased, then you probably guessed that I would be using it in one of the projects today. I looked through my stash and found this box that was the perfect size to frame that clock face. So I removed one of the handles and pulled out the brad nails that had held it in place. There was a decorative piece missing from one of the front corners, so I just removed the other one. I plugged the clock in, and to no surprise, it didn't work. But I don't care because I just love clocks, whether they work or not. So I just cut off the cord. I hot glued 3 little pieces of wood to the top and 2 sides for the rim of the clock face to rest on. I cut a 1x3 to the width of the box and then placed it underneath the clock face. Then I nailed through both sides into the 1x3 to hold it in place. I added another small piece of wood cut to the width of the box about halfway down to create a little shelf. Once I was sure that it was level, I nailed again from the outside of the box into the piece of wood to hold it in place. I gave the box a coat of Waverly Cashew chalk paint, and when the paint was dry, I distressed the edges with some sandpaper, and then I applied a coat of clear wax. I like to apply wax with a wax brush. I just use the Waverly brand sold at Walmart. And then I like to use a microfiber cloth to dab away the excess wax. To finish it off, I hot glued upholstery tacks into the holes where the decorative brackets had been. No surprise, this is my favorite project this week, but I'd love to know what you think. If you ever see an old mailbox at the thrift store, don't pass it up because you can use it for so many different things. This mailbox is adorable, but it was just a little too dirty looking for me, so I gave it a coat of white spray paint and then distressed it just a bit with some sandpaper. I wanted to use the mailbox on my front door in place of a spring wreath. So I added some styrofoam inside the mailbox. I used a couple floral pins to hold a bird nest in place on one side of the mailbox. And then I took apart another IKEA potted plant. This faux plant is really full, so I'll be able to use it in 2 or 3 different projects. To add a spring floral element, I cut down some cherry blossom stems. Or are these apple blossom stems? I'm not sure how you tell the difference. But anyway, I added some blossoms to the right-hand side of the mailbox. Then I filled in around the plant and the flowers with some Spanish moss and added a little Spanish moss to the nest and also added a couple green speckled eggs. I also had this cute fuzzy green rabbit that I wanted to add, and he had a small hole on the bottom, and so I cut a dowel rod down and shoved that into the hole and stuck it into the styrofoam to hold him in place. Okay, this turned out pretty cute. I might like this almost as much as the clock. Okay, this may be weird, but I picked up these 2 wood toy train cars because I like things with wheels. But I didn't like how close together the wheels were, so I sawed them off and then glued them back on in the place that I wanted, just using some super glue. Then I used upholstery tacks again to fill in the holes in the center of each of the wheels. There were a couple of wood pegs sticking up through the car, and so I stuck a vintage spool of thread on one. Then I stuck a loop of florist wire into the bottom of a fake bird, and then stuck that loop of wire inside the spool of thread. At this point, my camera shut off, but as you can see, I added some styrofoam and florals to the other side of the wood car, and then I finished it off by gluing a small jewelry charm onto the spool of thread. For the second train car, I hot glued on a couple blocks of wood to one end to make it look more like a truck, and then I painted it black to unify the different colors of wood. Once again, I added some styrofoam and stuck in some faux flowers and greenery, and then hot glued on a little Spanish moss to fill in any empty spots. I added a random rub-on transfer to the side of the truck just to add a little interest, and then I hot glued on a tiny bird. Who knew toy train cars could be so cute? Do you ever buy random lids just hoping that they'll fit something that you have at home? Well, I couldn't pass up this cute copper one. And I got lucky because it fit this blue jar perfectly. But I didn't like the copper and blue together. So first I spray painted the jar with white Zinsser primer, and then I gave it a couple coats of an off-white chalk paint. When the chalk paint was dry, I sealed it with a clear matte top coat. I thought this would make a cute salt cellar, so I took some Scrabble letters. Mine are from an old game, but you can find them at Walmart or Dollar Tree. And I drilled a small hole in the top and bottom of each letter so that I could link them together with some florist wire. I ran some twine through the top hole in the letter S, and then I ran a few beads onto the twine and tied the end of it to the copper lid. I found a pile of beautiful old handkerchiefs at the Goodwill Outlet, and I knew that I wanted to repurpose them. I printed out a butterfly pattern on cardstock, And then I used a light adhesive spray called Pixie Spray to adhere the pattern to the very thin and lightweight handkerchief fabric. I cut out the butterfly shape, making sure to stay just inside the black pattern lines. To give it a more finished appearance, I pinned the handkerchief butterfly to a piece of white felt, and then I stitched around the edges on my sewing machine. Then I trimmed up the felt so that it just created a very thin border around the handkerchief. To embellish the butterflies and add to the vintage charm of the handkerchiefs, I hot glued on bits of lace, doily, and buttons. Just using wire snips and my hands, I snapped apart this old welcome sign. Then I began hot gluing the handkerchief butterflies to one of the curly Q pieces of wire. I added additional hot glue and another small piece of felt on the back side to make sure that the butterflies stayed in place. Here is how it looked at this point, but I wasn't done yet. I took the other piece of wire and using my hands and a pair of pliers, I straightened out one end of that wire, and then I took the opposite end and twisted it around the first piece of wire holding the handkerchief butterflies. I added a bunch of hot glue and another small piece of felt at the place where the two pieces of wire joined together to help stabilize that spot. You might not think it, but it actually turned out really sturdy. And in case you're curious, here are the hidden gems I found at the Goodwill Outlet. These items and all of today's DIY projects are now for sale in my online store, CanterburyCottageShop.com. And I'm so excited to now offer a flat rate shipping fee of just $9.95. I hope you'll check it out. If you enjoyed today's video, here's another one with even more thrift flip ideas.